Hello, 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 people. Welcome back to the MUFC MPB channel. I know I normally do my shows on a Tuesday, but when opportunities like this come about, when individuals come around like this to discuss Manchester United and to really pick their brains, you've got to, just juggle the rotor and the schedule around slightly. I'm very, very happy to say I'm joined by Peter Hall, a sports journalist who's always right across Manchester United, but in particular with INEOS, he has been a very reliable individual when it has come to anything coming out of the club when it comes to the new ownership at Manchester United. So, firstly, Peter, thank you so much for joining me. And I always like to ask the individuals when I join them on a podcast, what's it like to report on Manchester United? Because it almost feels like the never-ending story, doesn't it?
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you. Well, on this particular story, very, very, very frustrating because it's gone on and on and on and on. And what we're talking, 14 months since the Glazers put the club potentially up for sale, and just the back and forth and the admin involved in this story in particular is very frustrating. Everyone wants to talk about United. Everyone wants to talk about it, whether it's good, whether it's bad. It's never in the middle with United, is it really? I mean, that's why it's always interesting to people. A huge club is either doing really, really well or really, really badly. And the majority of non-United fans around the world love seeing Man United doing badly. So, which is why it's so popular at the moment. It's a very interesting club to cover, put it that way. But very, very all-consuming. It does take over your life a little bit.
Tell me about it. It's I think that's the perfect way to put things, isn't it? Really, and as you say, it's ongoing. It's never ending, really. And one name, even though that this individual hasn't been linked with Man United for too long, when you compare to the saga beginning in the first place, when it comes to Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos, is Dan Ashworth. Now, obviously, we know and we understand Sir Jim Ratcliffe is a huge admirer of Dan Ashworth. He's already come out in public interviews and said how brilliant he is at his job and how much of an asset he would be to a club like Manchester United. So, my understanding at this moment in time is that the talks will continue to go on. This stumbling block of, I think, around 10 to 20 million that Newcastle desire for him is brave, shall we say? But what is
Mm.
the latest from your side of things? Is an agreement close between United and Newcastle? And how much do you expect Man United to pay potentially to get the services of Dan Ashworth through the door at Old Trafford?
Well, I think we can safely say that from what I can gather from the club and around the deal, United aren't going to pay £20 million. I mean, that's insane when you really think about it for a man in a suit, a sporting director. It's incredible. I mean, it shows what the transfer world has become now that clubs are willing to pay £20 million for a sporting director. But from all the conversations I've had, if United are going to get him earlier than the gardening leave, the end of his gardening leave for Newcastle, then they're going to have to pay a substantial amount. But INEOS are very aware that this is a huge appointment that they need to get right, and Dave Brailsford identified Ashworth very early in the process. He's been a long-standing friend of Dan Ashworth's, worked together at the FA on the consultancy basis. They've known each other for a long time. And as from all people I've spoken to, when Dave Brailsford sets his mind on a particular individual that he wants for a role, he will go and get that person. He's a master at convincing people to come and join his project, no matter what it's doing. And he was adamant that Paul Ashworth was the one. They identified Paul Ashworth as the main target, and they were going to go for him first and then worry about others afterwards if Ashworth said no. But I said this on Twitter last week, and I got a lot of stick from Newcastle fans for it. But if Manchester United come for you in the state that Manchester United are in now, like, it's a blank canvas for Dan Ashworth. He's going to be the best paid sporting director in the world. He's going to get a huge amount of money to spend on the players that he wants for, I would say, the biggest club in the world. You can't turn that down, no matter what stage your project is at Newcastle. And he wasn't looking elsewhere. It wasn't like he was actively seeking employment elsewhere. You can't turn that down. And that's why Brailsford knew that United were going to get the man. And it's why they're happy to wait, because they want Dan Ashworth. And they're happy to wait. And my guess from different conversations I've had is I think it'll be split down the middle. I think they'll pay around sort of 10, 12 million, but have to wait probably until January, next January, which doesn't bode well for a lot of United fans who want change and want change now. But that doesn't mean other appointments aren't going to come in the meantime. There's going to be more appointments in the recruitment department. So they're willing to wait for Ashworth essentially. And the ball's in Newcastle's court really financially, because they don't have to. They don't have to give in. They can wait. They're happy to. They don't want to be pushed over in this situation. And if they can get 20 million, I don't think they will, but if they can get 20 million, they're very tight on financial fair play at the moment as well. And that means that they won't have to sell potentially Bruno Guimaraes or one of the other big players that they might have had to sell to sort of balance the books. So Newcastle are under no pressure to sell. But if it was me and I was Newcastle, I'd perhaps cave a little bit further down the line, take some money and move on, because there's plenty of good other sporting directors around available that they can get and carry on the work that Dan Ashworth was doing. He didn't actually have a revolutionary effect on Newcastle so far, because a lot of the signings that you see now at Newcastle came in before he did. So he was only in the infancy anyway. So if I was them, I'd move on. I understand why they are a bit annoyed. This was going to be, Ashworth was going to be there for a long time and completely revolutionize the club. They were going to, talk about stadium moving, but Manchester United come in for you and say, here's a blank checkbook, here's a blank canvas, do what you want. You can't say no to that.
Yeah, it's a little bit tempting to say the least, isn't it, when a club the size of Man United come in for you? And as you mentioned there, in terms of obviously Manchester United fans, of course they're desperate to get in as many individuals relevant into the club so they can start this new era, if you like. And ultimately, I think one thing that we've learned over this whole process is patience is very key when it comes to Manchester United for a whole host of reasons. And as you mentioned there, there might be, and there most likely will be, should I say, different individuals coming in alongside Dan Ashworth. And one person I wanted to really pick your brains, as I said at the top of the show, is an individual called Julian Ward. Now, this has been obviously a name that's been bandied around, as has several other names. But in terms of this, head of recruitment role or a role that he would have at Manchester United, is there any weight to this story at all, or is this just a bit of idle gossip?
Oh no, big time. Because the other thing about Brailsford is he doesn't see. There's no such thing as too many cooks in his eyes. So whereas United's boardroom before there was bales of hay rolling around because there was nobody else there. He's going to get more bodies in than he perhaps needs. So there'll be several other senior people in the recruitment on top of Ashworth, and Julian Ward is someone that they've looked at for a while now. Julian Ward, he's sort of tarnished a little bit by his year as sporting director at Liverpool, and because Liverpool's performed so badly last season under his tutelage. And the thing is, I think that perhaps it was a too big a job for him at that stage of his career, because a sporting director, it's not just transfers. People think, oh yeah, you're doing transfers. It's not. You're looking after so many elements of the club, and perhaps it was a bit too all encompassing for him. And this role at United would suit him better, because recruitment is his specialty. And from conversations I've had, United have, well, INEOS and Sir Dave Brailsford have been interested in Julian Ward since the beginning of the process. No formal approaches has been made as far as I'm aware to Julian Ward, but he's someone they've looked at from a long time. I was absolutely convinced from other conversations that I had that Paul Mitchell was going to get this particular role, because Paul Mitchell had left his role at Monaco last season, moved back to Manchester. He's from Staley Bridge, not far from Manchester, but he'd moved back to the Manchester area and was actively seeking employment. And he's available, and his track record's fantastic. Look what he did at Tottenham under at Southampton first with Pochettino, went with Pochettino to Tottenham. Jim Radcliffe is well aware of him, obviously being a Monaco resident, and met with him several times in Monaco while he was at Monaco. But from what I can gather, I think he wants a more senior role than a head of recruitment role, like for example, sporting director at Newcastle. And Roma have long tracked Paul Mitchell as well to be their sporting director. So I think he wants that role, from what I can gather, rather than the head of recruitment role. I don't think that's completely dead in the water yet, though. Because like I said, he's moved with his family back to Manchester area. United come calling, you can work a lot. Yes, you've got to have a boss, but still a pretty big job at an amazing project, which United is, an amazing challenge, which United is. So I don't think that's in the what yet, but I think Julian Ward is the front runner now for that role, alongside Jason Wilcox as well. That's going to happen pretty soon, from what I can gather. There's so many, like, they plan to completely revamp the scouting department as well at United. It's very much the INEOS way, and the INEOS plan is, let's get the structure in place first. We want the best in the business as a sporting director, a head of recruitment, a level below that in the hierarchical structure. Then we identify the players. We don't want to be signing loads of players and then bring a sporting director in and go, well, I don't really fancy that left back. I would have got this guy. It's not going to be an overnight. United fans need to realize it isn't going to be an overnight fix. Like, I know he's getting on a bit, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and if I was at his age, I don't know if I'd fancy taking United on at this stage of my career. But he does seem in for the long haul, and he's going to take his time and get things right from the beginning. And it's so refreshing to hear somebody talk like that, because of, as we know, over the last 10 years, United have just gone from one disaster to the other in various departments, not just on the pitch, off it as well. And he said, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has already done with, Omar Barada coming in already, and the people that he's got lined up. He's made the right certain appointments at certain level in the club that better than the Glazers have done in 18 years. It shows that he's not doing these. If he was in this for a bit of fun for a short while, he'd be spending money on player transfers and getting, trying to convince Kylian Mbappe to come to Old Trafford. No, it's the structure first, and let's get this right, and let's take our time and not ruin things like they have done over the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you say that, it's refreshing to hear someone come out and speak about all of these things, but it's just refreshing to hear someone speak in terms of that side of things. To be honest, it's good to have even just a little bit of communication. It's quite funny, isn't it, in terms of the movements that Jim's already made in comparison to the 10, 15 years or so that the Glazers have been at Manchester United. And, you mentioned there almost about, everyone sort of focusing on getting the right individuals in place before they start making some surgery, if you like, to the team and the playing staff, shall we say. But one individual that I always like to talk about when I get individuals like you to join me, Pete, is Erik ten Hag. Now, of course, it doesn't take a genius to work out, especially after the weekend result. The pressure almost seems like it was right back to where it was when United were losing 3-0 to Bournemouth at Old Trafford. And it's again really funny what you said right at the start about it goes from one extreme to the other, doesn't it? Man United were the only unbeaten side left in the Premier League just a week ago, and now turmoil has begun once again for Manchester United. And as I said, Erik ten Hag, it's someone again that ultimately will be under review when it comes under a new stewardship at Manchester United from a senior/board level. But what do you understand about Erik ten Hag in terms of the perspective of INEOS, of Sir Jim Ratcliffe? And if we were to go down the line, I know what we're talking in a hypothetical sense here, of course, but if he is likely to go in the summer, for instance, what kind of individuals or what kind of candidates would INEOS look for when it comes to the Manchester United manager, if of course it was completely their say?
Yeah, it was funny after the Fulham game. I was getting loads of texts off people saying, "Well, that's it, that's him gone again." I was like, he's not. Ten Hag's not going to go. I mean, unless they lose 10 games in a row and get embarrassed by City 8-0 in the derby, then he isn't going to go anywhere yet, because, like I said, they want to get the structure in place first. And from the early conversations, they've been impressed with Ten Hag. I think from what I can gather from the INEOS side is, I think they expected him to be a bit more stubborn, in the fact that he's had a lot of power as a manager in the transfer market. It was his decision to buy Martinez, his decision to buy Anthony, two different successes, different levels of success there. It was his decision to buy a lot of the Onana. It was his decision to buy a lot of the players that have come in. And these days, you don't get that power. You have a sporting director who does that. And that kind of sort of points to the fact that United have been lagging behind everyone else, and the fact they haven't had a sporting director, a director of football of sufficient caliber to do that. John Murtough has been in the role, but let's just say limited success in the transfer market. So that they're quite pleased with their early conversations with Ten Hag, and the fact that what they want to do, and Brailsford was absolutely adamant about this from the off, is that they want to instill not necessarily a formation or anything like that, but a style of football, a philosophy of football, and a way of doing things. And the manager will have to adhere to that. And that's what happens that's what happens at most clubs. Like, Pep Guardiola has a big say in the style of football at Man City, but when Pep goes, the style of football and the way that City go about doing things will be very, very similar to Pep, because that's the way that Manchester City play. And that's what United haven't got. United haven't got an identity. If you ask what's United's way, what's United's style of football, I couldn't tell you. City's possession based, Liverpool's high press. What's United? I don't know. I don't actually know what United's style of football is. And United should have that. And that is, Radcliffe and Brailsford are absolutely adamant that that is something they need to instill. A style, a approach that's going to outlive any manager. And I think they expected Ten Hag to be a bit more resistant to that, and him saying, "Well, no, I want to. It's my style." But I think he's realised that these guys mean business, and if I don't adhere to what they're saying, then I'm out, because he's very dispensable at the moment. Like, at the start of the summer, you had fans. You had some fans and some experts saying, he's one of the best managers in the country. A great start, won a trophy, playing decent football, good signings on paper. It was going quite well, and then typical Man United, it's come full circle again. But if he is to go, I think I've seen a lot of people messaging me last week about Thomas Tuchel. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that would be a good mix at all. I think that would be very toxic, and he's not someone that's on in INEOS's radar, despite reports that I saw in Germany last week. I think that's more from Tuchel's side, trying to put himself out there that he'd be open to such a role, but that wouldn't work. Julian Nagelsmann is an interesting one. I've seen that in the last few days. I think it's more speculative at the moment, because obviously he's very new to his role, his current role he's in. So that's the type of manager that they'd want. They'd want someone like Nagelsmann, and why Nagelsmann is appeals to them is that INEOS, again, when I say INEOS, it's Brailsford doing all these meetings and doing all this talking. He sought out advice from Ralph Rangnick, which a lot of United fans raise their eyebrows at, because they're like, because of his disastrous spell at United. But that was because he was given the coach's job rather than the director's football job. It's a typical Man United good idea executed terribly. That's the last 10 years. Lots of good ideas, but the execution's been terrible. Ralph Rangnick, one of the best sporting directors around, should have been sporting director and not a coach. Anyway, he is very much of the Nagelsmann school. He helped nurture Nagelsmann as a coach. And it's very much, he's very, very, very strict on having a philosophy and a style of play. And that's what the type of manager that INEOS want. They want someone that is adaptable, but will have their philosophy and their very obvious, in a way, style of play. And that's something that Ten Hag does lack. Now, if he has the right structure, and which is what INEOS think could possibly happen, then if he has the right backing behind him, then perhaps he can find this overriding philosophy and style of play and approach. And we'll see by the end of the season whether that starts to become obvious, because at the moment that is what's lacking at United, and that is the biggest concern for INEOS.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, you almost start to think to yourself, when it comes to Manchester United, there's so many issues and there's so many things that they need to address. And it goes back to, again, what you were saying a little bit earlier on in terms of that patient stuff. Manchester United fans will argue with us and say we've been more than patient over the last 10 years or so. But as we know, whether we like it or not, no team has a divine right to be successful and to win. So, yeah, it's going to be certainly a lot of things that that ultimately INEOS, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Brailsford, and all the individuals that they put in charge will have to address. And of course, I think the big area of desperation, if you like, from the Manchester United fans' perspective is ultimately the playing style, is the players, is the tactics, as you mentioned before. And, of course, as we know, without INEOS, with INEOS, whoever's in charge of Manchester United, there's always going to be links with several players, probably each and every single day when it comes to Man United. And, one name that I wanted to talk about was Ross Barkley. Now, there were obviously a few reports suggesting that Ross Barkley to Manchester United is possible. And it's my understanding that there is admiration from INEOS's side and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, but whether or not that's as concrete enough to say that there's genuine interest to bring him to Manchester United, I'm not so sure. But just before I get your opinion on this, I wanted to sort of give mine. And I think, look, before I say anything else, I think Ross Barkley has done incredible to get his career back on track, to even be in the conversation for the England squad and being linked with clubs like Manchester United. It is an absolute testament to him and then some. But if Manchester United are going to go down this route, and this is what I wanted to get your opinion on, if Man United are going to go down the route of signing someone like Ross Barkley, who isn't exactly, an up and coming player, he's not someone who's going to have 5, potentially 6 years at Manchester United. And I just don't understand the purpose of it. Now, we look at more of an extreme case in Casemiro. This guy is arguably one of the greatest players in that position to ever play the game. He was brilliant for a year. And then now we look at the situation he's in, and ultimately it almost looks like the beginning of the end for him. So I just can't quite understand the Ross Barkley sort of maneuver or that type of profile of player. And does it really feel like Man United are moving on if they do sign someone like this? I'm not quite sure. So, firstly, what have you heard of anyone like Ross Barkley? And is this the type of player in terms of profile, in terms of experience, in terms of nationality? Is this the type of person that INEOS, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Brailsford, however you want to say it, will go for?
Yes, there's interest, but I think partly and mainly it's a needs must situation because he centre midfield is not one of the key areas that United are actually focusing on player recruitment wise. And I know that sounds ridiculous because it's not that strong, but they think there are other bigger problems. So another striker to go along with Højlund is top priority. Like absolute adamant that is top priority. And as we saw at the weekend, we can see why. Because you can't rely on a 21-year-old who had got a mediocre record before coming to Old Trafford, has done brilliantly after a terrible start. You can't rely on him to play 3 games a week and lead the line and shoulder the goal scoring mantle on his own. You can't. It's not fair. It's not fair on him. It's not fair on his career. And United isn't what was sold to Rasmus Højlund in the brochure. He saw a lot of trophies and a lot of glory in that brochure that they wheel out. And he got here and he's like, hold on, why am I leading the line every week? And why am I being shoved in front of the media to talk about another defeat? Like, what's going on here? And his temperament has been absolutely phenomenal. I can't speak highly enough of Rasmus Højlund so far. But a centre back is an absolute must as well, and they want another fullback, as we can see now. Luke Shaw plays 15 games a season. Malacia is still not fully fit. Dalot, is he good enough? I've been thinking this for 5 years. Every time I see him, 1 week he's great, 1 week he's not. Fullback is another absolute must. And in this world of financial fair play, money is not infinite. So centre midfield is where essentially they're going to try and strengthen as much as they possibly can, but without spending any money. And who's available for a free. And I understand that it does look quite bad, really, that a player that was at Luton the season before is going to come and he'd probably start for United. Like, such is the sort of dearth of options. Very fortunate that Kobbie Mainoo has taken to the Premier League like a duck to water. Casemiro is a weird one for INEOS. They see Casemiro as the sort of the epitome of everything that's been wrong about United's transfer policy in the last few years, overpaying for players who are past the best. And it's very hard to motivate players like that. Like, he's won everything. Yeah. Like, he's won everything. And does he want to be struggling every week in a struggling side when he could be off to Saudi Arabia and getting double what he's on now? And he has his injury problems, he has his fitness problems, and he looked great last year, but is it working out? There is holes in that midfield, no, absolutely no doubt. But I think it's going to have to be make do with what's available for cheap or free. And I was saying this to somebody the other day who was actually it was querying, like, surely not Ross Barkley, Manchester United, but Ross, there is a player in there. He was excellent for Everton, obviously, but then when I don't think you can judge a player who's been at Chelsea in the last 5 years because they're such a mess, and I don't think you can judge a lot of players who've played for Manchester United in the last 5 years. United, the talent that's come through the doors at Old Trafford and the talent that's come through the doors at Stamford Bridge that have gone on to be successful elsewhere afterwards, or were really good before. There's so many names you can think of, and it's just when you're at such chaotic clubs when things are going so badly wrong, it's very hard for these individuals to fulfill the ability that the potential that their ability suggests. And Barclays, I think, is another one. Went to Chelsea at the wrong time, and then that it's hard to resurrect your career after that. And look what he's doing. Look what he's doing this season in a team that should, on paper, be struggling. So I think on paper it doesn't look like the greatest sign, does it? Like let's start of a new era with the richest man in Britain. Bringing Ross Barkley in from Luton to play in midfield. It doesn't look great, but when you really think about it and sort of maybe swallow your pride a little bit, it does make a hell of a lot of sense financially. And even if he's just a squad player, even if they do, sell £200 million worth of players, have some money to strengthen the midfield, as a second option, I don't think he's a bad option at all. I think he's a lot better than some of the current ones. Put it that way.
Yeah, I think, again, highlights this thing this notion that I always believe, especially since I've started working in the media when it comes to football, is it's all about optics, isn't it? Now, if Manchester United do sign several players, a striker, a new fullback, a centre half, and then they bring in an individual like Barkley, then again, optics will say, okay, well, you've done all the business that we wanted, the more attractive business, should we call it? And then you brought in someone who's going to bring in a bit of experience and essentially just an extra pair of legs in midfield. So, okay, maybe you have convinced me a little bit there, but if it doesn't work out and he does join him, I will be coming straight into your DMs and complaining, mate. And I'll join everyone else in doing that as well. But what I wanted to talk about as well, because I know we are running out of time because you are a very busy individual, but I want to talk about two individuals here, and I want not only to, get your side of things in terms of information, but also your opinion on this as well. Now, look, there's two big individuals at Manchester United for a whole host of reasons in Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandez. Now, of course, there'll be, in the era of social media, there'll be several clips going around of both players respectively, not doing the so-called traditional Man United way of playing in terms of not tracking back, in terms of trying to con the ref a little bit, if you like. And I just wanted to really discuss this because I think at the end of the day, Man United fans have almost got to the stage now where they're really trying to hold on to the very little things that have given them a bit of hope and a bit of optimism in the last few years. And I think, it's very fair to say that Rashford and Fernandez, they fit in that bill. And then some when it comes to having a bit of optimism when it comes to Manchester United, and the very little optimism, shall we say. But at the end of the day, no one, I think, should be sort of immune from any criticism. I think especially if they're the more senior players in the dressing room, if they're the most paid players or they're the captain of Manchester United, then ultimately, I think, in my personal opinion, they should be held to higher standard because they're the ones who are supposed to be setting the standards, if you like. But as we said, throughout this, as we both understand throughout the many months we've been covering Manchester United, that everyone's on review, no matter how good or how reliable these players have been for Manchester United, that everyone is going to almost have a bit of a sit down with INEOS, if you like, and just to see where everyone's at in terms of the future and if the future is at Manchester United. So firstly, I want to talk about your opinion on these players. Where do you think that this current mess, if you like, leaves them going into the future? And are they even at risk of being sold in the summer?
Well, I don't think there's many that aren't at risk. Essentially, there's not many that you can look at in that Man United squad and say they must stay. These must be part of the new Radcliffe revolution. Like, there's not many that you think definitely you can hang your hat on. Kobbie Mainoo is one, which is a damning indictment on everyone else because he's so young and he's only just coming to the side. Garnacho is another. Um, and for me, well, Martinez is, if he can stay fit. And then I think that's it. And then I think the only other one that can get in that group that should definitely be part of a new dawn for Manchester United is Bruno Fernandez. Now, I know he divides opinion a lot because even as fans, some of it is difficult to watch, to be quite frank, especially from your captain. Um, the way he gesticulates, the way he moans at referees, the way he moans at teammates. He's often, we've asked him about this many times, and he says, he says he's just a passionate player, and that's just how he expresses himself, and get over it essentially, which is fine. And I do get that, but sometimes it is a bit of a difficult watch, especially when in defeats, like he doesn't take defeat very well, which maybe is a sign of a good player. He doesn't nobody likes to lose, but I think what the other thing about Bruno Fernandez is we take Bruno Fernandez for granted. Like, he's still the top creator in the Premier League in terms of chances created. He might not have the most assists, but that's because ahead of him, people are missing these chances. He still creates the most chances from open play. From both in general in the Premier League, and he did that last season, and he did it this season. Now you do take that for granted. If something happens every week, if a player's creating, he's your top creator every single week, you do take it for granted. That's just human nature. And I think we do forget that about Bruno Fernandez. Yes, his conduct at certain times is not what you would really want from your captain, but he's still doing his job. Like, he's still creating the chances. He could do with them, he could do with scoring a few more goals. He's not scored a Premier League goal since November, but he's still creating the chances. He's there to create the chance, and he's still doing it. And there's nobody better statistically in the Premier League at doing that. So I do think, no, and it's not gone particularly well for as a club while Fernandez has been at United. So to still do that is testament to the man's ability. And I do think we forget that. And I think that with a better team around him, it'd be even better. And I think as if things do start to improve, I think you'd like to think that he becomes a bit more cheerful on the pitch and a bit less frustrating to watch. Rashford, on the other hand, my personal opinion is I think it's time for him to go. And from conversations I've had, I know that from the player side and the club side, there's no desire to sell. Like, the player doesn't want to leave. He's happy after, obviously after his latest misdemeanor and out in Belfast and ringing in sick for work the next day. They've repaired the relationship. It's not like Sancho, where that relationship is irreparable and there's no way back. With Rashford, the relationship with the club has been repaired. I just don't think if somebody does offer with a heavy heart, if somebody does offer an acceptable amount, and in the era of financial fair play, where academy graduate is 100% profit, then he has to go. Then he has to be first on the list, and you can use that money elsewhere on a player who's going to score more than 6 goals a season. Yes, he scored 30 goals last year, but other than last season, he's not been that. He's never, for me, he's never fulfilled the potential that we saw when he came on and when he debuted and scored twice against Arsenal. He's never quite got to that level, that everyone thought he might do. And there's many other reasons to let him go, i.e., what he's been doing off the field in the last year. PSG are still keen. I did a story last week on this, that he is on a 3-man shortlist with Osimhen and Gavi from Barcelona to be the marquee signing to replace Mbappe. Whether they will pay an acceptable amount is another thing. But if they do, and he does, and he will want to, and he will go, then I think United do have to sell. And it's you never want to sell a local player who's grown up with the club and has done some great things for United sporadically. But if the new era, if you can get, I don't know, 50 million pounds for him, and you can use all of that to reinvest in the squad with a sporting director who knows the players to sign, then it's an absolute no-brainer for me. And if someone comes in, then unfortunately for local support Manchester United fans, then perhaps it's time to go.
Yeah, yeah. It's again going to be something to really track, isn't it? It's going to be alone a standalone figure in terms of Rashford potentially moving on is a saga in itself. Forget everything else that's going on at Manchester United. And very, very quickly, I just wanted to really squeeze in this final question,
Yeah.
and just really get your side of things in terms of Mason Greenwood. Now, I always say we don't need to go into why he's not at Manchester United at the moment. We all know why. But obviously, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's recent comments about making a fresh decision will be made on Mason Greenwood. What do you know about that, and how fresh of a decision will that be, if that makes any sense?
I spoke to people around the club last week about this, and the reaction I got was a bit of bewilderment, really. Like, why did Ratcliffe need to bring that up? Like, that was a very easy no comment. We'll look at this later. To open the door to go and investigate in the whole thing again is just a task that he's got enough on his plate. Like, if he's talking about rebuilding a stadium, not just a stadium, rebuilding the whole of the area.
The whole of Manchester, it seems, doesn't it?
All of Manchester, well, him and Gary Neville are going to rebuild Manchester. And then you're talking about, you've got to spend a year with negotiating with Newcastle to get Dan Ashworth in. You've got to revamp the scouting department. You've got to get another head of recruitment in, or two. Then you've got to address the mess that's on the pitch, as we saw on Saturday. He's got enough on his plate. He doesn't need to be. I mean, United have done a 6-month internal investigation into Mason Greenwood, and that the decision at the end of that was that his future is best served away from Manchester United. He doesn't need to be coming back. Now, you can argue the morals of whether United can keep the money for Mason Greenwood or they should donate the money if they sell him. But I think a sale it's not popular with a lot of supporters, but a sale has to happen. United need to move on from that. They don't need that to be. From the conversations I had last week with people around the club, they were saying that I don't think that Radcliffe understands the enormity of the story and the enormity of what it was like first time around. Like, it completely took over the news agenda for weeks and weeks and weeks, and perhaps he wasn't paying enough attention to that from Monaco, and he didn't understand the strength of the feeling towards Mason Greenwood about the whole situation. And I don't think it's something he needs to reopen again. If he does, it's going to be so time consuming and it's going to delay everything else. I think it's something he really needs to consider the opposite and move on quickly from. And with Spanish clubs interested, Atletico Madrid, from what I can gather, are the most keen, and Barcelona. If they're interested parties and they're willing to pay 40 million, again, let's take the money, off we go.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it's, again, as you say, there's so many other layers in terms of the problems and the issues that they've got to worry about. And do they really need to add another one? As you say, it's questionable to say the least. But Peter, that's absolutely flown by. I just want to say a massive thank you for joining me today, and of course joining the MUFC MPB channel. Thank you so much, not only for that, but of course for everything that you're doing in the media. Being up to date with stuff is almost a lose-lose situation, isn't it? Because if you get things right, then people are going to go, okay, well, everyone else reported it. And if you get things wrong, people will never forget it. But that has not stopped you from doing all of your work. So a massive, massive thank you. Keep up the brilliant work, and I'm sure we will be catching up very soon again.
Thank you. It's been great to be on.
Pleasure as always. And thank you everyone who has watched today's episode of my podcast for the MUFC MPB channel. Please be sure to like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Please be sure, if you don't already, follow Pete on Twitter. I'll leave his handle in the comment section below. And again, as I say, keep up to date with everything by following MUFC MPB. I'll see you guys very, very soon.